software, but now it's our keynote speaker. He leads a company that many of you listen to every day. Tim Westergren is a shining example of an entrepreneur who pursued his dream. He's asked me to keep his introduction short, so please join me in welcoming Tim Westergren.
That's the shortest ever.
Sorry.
That's the kind of introduction I like. Just before I start, can I get a quick show of hands? How many people here have actually used Pandora? Boy. Home field advantage. So I thought what I would do up here is tell you guys sort of an abbreviated story of Pandora, how we got to where we are now. This is a very unlikely place for me to be holding a microphone up here, speaking to all of you today, for a number of reasons. I got started, I guess, on this journey. I graduated from college in 1988. I was a poli-sci major, so basically unemployable. And when I graduated, I had a deep passion for music. I'd been playing music since I was a small child. So I knew I wanted to do something around music. I didn't know what, and I had no real skills. So shortly after college, I went to a nanny placement agency called Mothers Indeed, and got a job as a nanny. Actually, the correct term for that's manny. So my first job out of college, which I held for 5 years, was as a manny for a couple kids. And my life consisted during that time of getting up in the morning, going on the piano, playing piano until about 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and then going to pick up these 2 kids from school and spending the afternoon playing wiffle ball with them, making sure they did their homework. Then I cooked dinner for the family. And then I came home and got back on the piano and played till I went to bed. So I spent about 4 or 5 years around kids and playing piano 6, 7 hours a day. Really woodshedding. My ambition was to become the next Oscar Peterson. And after a few years of that, I decided to go try to start performing. So I started playing in rock bands. And I spent most of my 20s living out of a van, traveling around the United States. As that sort of tailed off, I took a shot at being a film composer. So I started writing music for movies. And over the course of these many years, I obviously started to develop an interest in music and the plight of the working musician. And when I was a film composer, my primary job was to understand the taste of a director. And what we would typically do is sit down together. We have a locked picture on a screen next to us, and I'd bring with me a stack of CDs, and I would start playing songs for them, and I'd get their feedback, sort of thumbs up, thumbs down. And over the course of half an hour or so, I'd sort of try to glean from them what kind of music they wanted for their movie. It was sort of the equivalent of a musical Myers-Briggs test. And what I was really doing was kind of mapping their taste onto sort of an informal taxonomy in my head of musical attributes, beginning to understand the kind of harmonic content, the instruments they liked, sort of themes and so on. So when I went back to my studio, I could compose a piece of music that they liked. So I was doing that for a little while. I was living in the Bay Area. It was late 90s, so like the heyday of the first big .com bubble. And I was just surrounded by, all sorts of entrepreneurship, and music was a very exciting category. And I was reading an article one day about an artist named Amy Mann, and very talented singer-songwriter, who was having some trouble in her career kind of releasing records and reaching her audience, and this idea popped into my head, like, how about if I try to codify this musical taxonomy, and by marrying it to mathematics, build a recommendation engine. So find a way to connect one song to another by understanding its musicological content. And then use that to recommend and help people discover all this great music. I spent many years among artists who very talented but essentially invisible. And this could be a way to harness technology to help people find those bands. So I shared the idea with a friend of mine who said, hey, that sounds cool, let's start a company, that's the way it was done back then. And literally 2 months later, March of 2000, we raised $1.5 million from a handful of angel investors, and we rented a studio apartment in South San Francisco. It had a thick black shag carpeting, I remember, and created this thing called the Music Genome Project. And it was a taxonomy. It's about 450 individual musical attributes that sort of collectively describe a song. So it's every dimension of melody and harmony and rhythm and form and instrumentation, lyrical content, vocal content. It's a very, very detailed list of attributes that capture, it's like musical DNA. Just by way of example, we analyzed just the voice along about 30 attributes, just to understand the timbre and delivery of the voice. So we architected this and hired a bunch of musicians, ultimately had about 70 of them, and they came in every day, slapped on a pair of headphones, and listened to songs, and scored them manually, one song at a time, along these hundreds of musical attributes. And we did it, believe it or not, on pencil and paper. I kid you not. And then we had some temps who entered that data onto a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. And one of my co-founders was a mathematician, and he built an algorithm that allowed us to sort of connect these songs. So when an analysis was done, each song was represented by a string of numbers that sort of corresponded to these attributes, and we built an algorithm that would compute the proximity of one song to another along these hundreds of musical attributes. And it took us a little shy of a year to sort of build the first prototype. So this was about 10,000 or so songs that have been now analyzed by these musicians. And this is a very time-consuming process. For a simple pop song, it took 15 or 20 minutes to analyze it. You know, a symphonic piece could take over an hour. So we found ourselves, I guess it was 9 or 10 months into this, with our first prototype, and it was a Microsoft Excel document with 10,000 rows and several hundred columns of numbers, and an Excel macro where you typed into the spreadsheet one of the songs in this 10,000 song collection and then hit rank. And the macro computed proximity from that starting song to everything else in the collection. So it rank ordered these 10,000 songs. It took about 3 or 4 minutes to do that calculation. So I remember, like it was yesterday, we tried it out for the first time. And we typed in a Beatles song, of course. Where else could you start? And hit rank, and then waited for 3 or 4 minutes while the macro calculated this rank order. And it eventually coughed up its list. And the first song on the list among these 10,000 songs was a Bee Gees song. Like, oh shit, this doesn't work, you know? We're a year into it. We burned through a lot of dough, and turns out it was kind of a ridiculous idea. Then we listened to the audio. And for any Bee Gees fans in the room, I hope there are some. I count myself among them. All right. Before they became sort of a famous disco band, they were actually essentially a Beatles knockoff band. They were signed by the same manager that signed the Beatles, and we listened to this song, and it was a dead ringer for the Beatles. We actually thought we had the wrong audio associated with the band, but we checked it out, and sure enough, this tune was the perfect match, and it was certainly one of the best matches from this catalog. So we went from despair to elation, because we realized not only had it matched it, but it had also done something very counterintuitive. It had put, you know, a song by a band you wouldn't ordinarily associate with the Beatles together, because musicologically it was relevant. So, very exciting moment for us. Dove back in and continued to analyze music. Unfortunately, at this point we were beginning to run out of money. So $1.5 million goes pretty quickly when you hire a bunch of engineers, and less so for musicians, but for engineers. And so we realized things were not looking very good. at that time. We had begun to sort of put some feelers out to try and raise our next round of financing, and it was clear that things were not like they were in 1999. And so we began asking our employees to make our money last longer, to work for a smaller and smaller share of their salary. Until by the end of 2001, we weren't paying anybody anything. We called that salary deferral back then. It's actually illegal in California. We didn't know that because we couldn't afford an attorney, but so we were fat, dumb, and happy. But so this team of people, about 50 of them, worked for about 2.5 years without getting paid. Not all of them full time, but a good number of them, and we managed to hang on for about 2.5 years. Made it through 2003 into early 2004 because this group of people could have just wouldn't let go of this idea. By the end, it got pretty ugly. By the end of 2003, I had 11 maxed out credit cards, and I think I owed about $250,000 to friends and family, and anybody else who had the misfortune of meeting me during that time. I had a personal obligation for a 5-year office lease in Oakland. And I was a musician, so if this didn't work out, I was screwed. I was going to Mexico, basically. And we managed, though, somehow in 2004 to raise our Series B. So we raised $9 million from a collection of institutional investors, paid everybody back. Everybody got their back salary. Over $2 million of back salaries paid out. Another moment I will not soon forget, we had an all-hands meeting the day after this money had been wired into our bank account. We had all-hands meetings every 2 weeks during this time period. They were not generally very joyous occasions because it was about asking people to work for 2 more weeks for free. So people kind of trooped into the all-hands meeting expecting pep talk number 86, and instead of that, I just pulled out this huge wad of envelopes from my back pocket, and every time I say this, I get goosebumps, and handed out checks to all these people, who'd been doing this for 2.5 years, and paid everybody back. They'd also accrued some equity during that time, so they'd become larger stakeholders in the business. And the company kind of got its second life. At that time, we had not yet become Pandora in name or in product. We had just built this enormous musical taxonomy, the Music Genome Project, and had this cool demo. Had tried all sorts of different businesses to get it to work. We did it in kiosks. We'd licensed it through an API to online sites, and none of that had really turned out to be a real business. So we sat on this sort of interesting intellectual property asset. And we took this big slug of money, and that gave us some time to think about, what are we going to do with this? And we spent about, 6-7 months kind of thinking that over, sort of a big strategic review. Brought on a CEO, a guy named Joe Kennedy, who remains the CEO of the company. And sort of he took us through this big exercise of kind of revisiting the strategy, and we decided, wow, let's take this genome and repurpose the technology and build a personalized radio product. Broadband penetration had grown dramatically, so streaming audio had become kind of a mass consumer proposition, and we had sort of, unbeknownst to us, built what really was the perfect technology for personalizing playlists. So we built a front end, we called it One-Click Custom Radio, and in the fall of 2005, we had our first version of it. And we gave access to 200 of our closest friends and family, sort of password-protected access to a demo to let them kick the tires. And a couple weeks after that, there were like 5,000 people that were accessing the demo. They had promiscuously shared their passwords. Obviously, kind of, on the one hand, disappointing that our friends had so violated our trust, but exciting because people were obviously, they liked it enough to do that. And so we decided, what the heck, let's go ahead and launch this product. So we launched Pandora.com. Initially as a subscription-only site that lasted just a few weeks, and then became a free service. So call it November 2005, Pandora, as you guys know it, came to be. And it just took off like a rocket ship. The first few months of that experience were just extraordinary for all of us. We were adding, first thousands and then tens of thousands of people a day, all completely by word of mouth. So we were given the big, warm, viral embrace by the internet. And within a matter of months, we were adding 15, 20, 30,000 people a day, all just people telling each other about it. And then in the summer of 2007, a big inflection point hit when the smartphones came out. Of course, initially the iPhone. Our app was available on the iPhone the day the App Store went live, doubled our growth rate overnight, and led to, a sort of a huge explosion of consumer electronics implementations. I mean, this conference has become a real hub for us over the last few years, because there was this very rapid transition of listening from computers, laptops, desktops at work to sort of everything else, because people began taking smartphones and just plugging them into things, everything from stereos to car dashboards. And before long, we found ourselves working with every major consumer electronics company, every major car company. There are now over 1,000 devices that stream Pandora. And our listening is now 70% off the desktop. So it's really become sort of a mobile product. And I still remember very clearly to this day, what for me was kind of the real moment when I sort of felt like I saw the potential of this. It was the first time I used Pandora in a car. So I share a car with my wife, so I don't have a car. So it had been out on smartphones for, I think, 6 or 7 months before I got to use it in my own car. And so I'd heard about it, but I hadn't actually experienced it. And I remember the first time I did, I had an iPhone, and I pulled it out, launched my station on it, and then I bought a little $2 adapter, and I plugged it into the dashboard, and then went driving down the highway. And about 15, 20 minutes later, I was driving along, and I found myself thinking, man, this radio station is just nailing it for me, It's like it knows who I am or something. And I'd forgotten I was listening to Pandora, but it was almost like cognitive dissonance. It was like I was being DJ, but this was a radio, and it was coming out of my speakers, and I realized, wow, I've become accustomed to a form of radio that's not personalized. And I'm a big fan of radio. I grew up with it. I've been a huge consumer of it. But here I was hearing one song after another that I would have chosen had I been the DJ. And I was in my car, so it was a place where I'd been accustomed to listening to radio. And I think at that moment I realized this could really, really change the whole game. I think that a lot of people don't know this. Maybe this crew is different, but 80% of the hours we spend on music, we spend listening to it through radio. So there's been all these great innovations around on-demand listening, subscription services, portable players, et cetera, that make on-demand listening so easy. But still, with all that, people go back to radio because it's simple, you discover stuff on it, and it's remained the sort of mainstay. And I think this new version of radio, this personalized version, is going to make a huge impact on that. And I think it's going to do it in 2 really important ways. The first one, of course, is for listeners. For consumers. At Pandora, we have the great sort of luxury of communicating with listeners on a constant basis and hearing about how excited folks are that radio is playing their music now, and they're reconnecting to it. And we have folks on Pandora who literally are 103 years old that are listening to stuff that they grew up with, now on their own personalized radio stations. And of course, we have teenagers and sort of everything in between. So I think for consumers, it's a way to reconnect and sort of reinvigorate a passion for something that a lot of us, I think, we forget as we get older. Music sort of recedes and becomes kind of wallpaper because it's too hard. The radio's not playing our music. We don't have time to go to the record store. But when you get reconnected with it, you remember, wow, when I was a teenager, this is all I cared about. And I think that's a really, to me, a cultural thing, a valuable thing for our culture. And the second piece, which is near and dear to me as a musician, is what this means for artists. Pandora now in our collection, we have over 100,000 artists. 70% of those artists are independent. So it's an enormous amount of music that's not, yeah, thanks. It's a lot of music that's not getting played, never has been on any form of mass promotion. And of those 100,000 artists, they're represented by a little over 1 million songs. 95% of those songs play every month on Pandora. So it is truly the long tail come to life, you know? And we're talking about bluegrass and classic country, choral music and klezmer and zydeco and ragtime, you know? All this great music that's been withering on the vine. And it now has a home on Pandora. And we're beginning to hear about and see the impact this is having on artists, the working artists. As Pandora has reached the scale that we have a little shy of 70 million people come to Pandora, listen every month. It's actually starting to move the needle for artists. And they're writing to tell us, you know, we're seeing big growth in our iTunes sales. More people are coming to our shows. More people are visiting our website, and it corresponds with when they get added to the system. And it's our dream as a business that as we grow and get larger, that maybe one day this is going to happen. But there will come a time when, if you're a musician, the day your song gets added to Pandora, that's the day you can quit your job. Like, it's done. Like, your music goes out to an enormous audience that likes your kind of music, and they become your patrons. I mean, part of my goal is that, you know, that day will come when you graduate college and you tell your parents you want to be in a rock band, or a Manny, and then be a rock band like I did. Instead of being horrified, they think, you know, it's a good middle-class living you got going, kid, you know? Good choice. I didn't waste my college tuition money on you. And I think this is the infrastructure for that. And the technology is driving that. I mean, the CES is the hub for all these devices that are making Pandora sort of truly ubiquitous, and I think give us a shot at becoming a big player in that. I just want to take a brief diversion into the legislative side of things too, just very briefly. This also, I think, speaks to the listener passion for this. And in the summer of 2007, Pandora almost disappeared because there was a ruling around the royalty rates that we pay that would have effectively almost tripled the amounts that we pay. We pay both publishers and performers, which we're proud to do. But the royalty was so large that it literally would have put us out of business, would have really pulled the rug out from under the whole internet industry. And we weren't able to sort of there was no recourse for us through the established channels, and so just before kind of pulling the plug, we decided we'd kind of throw a Hail Mary and try to organize a political campaign. And we emailed our listeners. At the time, I think we had maybe 7 or 8 million of them, and with an email that said, Pandora's going to go out of business. If you want us to stay around, please call your member of Congress. And because we fortunately had asked for people's zip codes when they registered, we said, and here's their name and phone number, and fax number if you're so inclined. And there was an absolutely enormous response. It's hard to quantify exactly, but I would say somewhere between 1.5 million and 2 million people contacted their members about this issue. We understand that more people wrote in about internet radio than called in about the Iraq War. That's fucked up, but it's all right for us. But it was such an enormous explosion of like just constituent support that Congress actually intervened and got that fixed. Sort of put it back. It still needs some more work, but it was a survivable rate. And Pandora was able to continue, and internet radio was able to go on. So there was a resolution through Congress. It was a great experience for us to see that in action. We're going to come around and do that again. And I think it was also a demonstration of an activated population that feels ownership over this. And I think that internet radio offers one of those very rare opportunities for sort of a win-win-win, which is a win for technology and business and entrepreneurship, a win for consumers. Clearly, this is something that people want. And I think the third is a win for content. This is a medium that is providing great support, exposure, promotion, but also paying royalties, so delivering new streams of revenue. And I think there's a chance here to set up the radio industry for a really extraordinary future, where I think consumers will be getting what they want, which will have all sorts of great benefits. It'll be driving lots of new innovation, business, job creation, et cetera, and it will also be rewarding artists, and rewarding artists in a very democratic, inclusive way. We're talking again about tens of thousands of artists that are going to be that will have access to a platform that promotes them to a large audience, and building what we like to sort of call at Pandora a musician's middle class. And so we hope the legacy of all this will be satisfied consumers, and this new sort of a new industry of artists who aren't living on ramen like I used to do, but who actually have viable careers. And the beauty of a connected radio experience like the one we have is you are communicating one-to-one with a listener. You can use that to power personalized listening. You can also use it to activate people on a local level. And just to give you a glimpse of the future, and I'll end on this, we have a sense of place for listeners because of their zip code, and we have a very strong idea of what they like musically. We have 22 billion pieces of thumb feedback on Pandora. You guys love to thumb, which we like. So we essentially know where the audience is in the US. And an idea that we're cooking up is to allow an artist to log into Pandora and look at a map of the US and see where their thumbs ups are, and have it plotted across the country, and allow them to drop in a dozen dates on a tour that's through their sort of high thumb up zones, and then with a click of a button, log out, get in the van, and drive to those cities, and their listeners will be alerted a couple weeks before they get to each location based on geography and their affinity for that kind of music, that this band is coming with a sort of one-click ability to buy tickets. And if that's done well, I think it could solve, the singular problem of musicians. How do you get people to come hear you play? How do you build a foundation for your career? And I think you put that together with a robust radio property that's playing this music to people all day long, every day, and I think you have the makings of a really exciting, healthy, profitable, and growing music industry, which I think stands to all of our benefit. So thank you for letting me talk to you tonight, and for building all of these great consumer electronics products that we take advantage of. Thanks so much.
So thank you, Tim, for your very, very compelling remarks. You've heard the applause, but we have to squint a little bit. But can you just show in the audience, what do you think? Thumbs up, thumbs down for Pandora? There you go. So thank you very much. And we have Henry Jeskowitz of Gibson. We have a lot of passionate music lovers and owners and electronics companies that are passionate about music as part of our industry. And it's a great case. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our program. Thank you so much for helping make this event and CEA and CES successful. We have dessert behind you. Please enjoy the evening and the rest of the show.